Aisha had always felt like an outsider in her own home. At 24, she was caught in a delicate web of emotion, ambition, and loneliness. Her life, shaped by her mother's early death and her father's subsequent remarriage, had been anything but ordinary. Raised in a small, modest home on the outskirts of the city, Aisha had learned early on to rely on herself. With her father, Saeed, consumed by his work and indifferent to her emotional needs, Aisha often felt invisible. But it was Mariam, her stepmother, who made her feel unwanted. Mariam, a woman of sharp beauty and even sharper intentions, had brought with her not only a new family dynamic, but also a cold, calculating way of life. Mariam had 2 children from her previous marriage, both older than Aisha, and they were the center of her world. Unlike Aisha, they were always dressed in the latest fashion, pampered and showered with affection. Aisha, on the other hand, was expected to pull her weight around the house. She cleaned, cooked, and took care of the chores, while her stepmother and step-siblings lived their privileged lives, untouched by the daily grind. Despite Aisha's beauty and intelligence, her stepmother never seemed to notice or appreciate her for anything other than an extra pair of hands to manage the household. In Mariam's eyes, Aisha was nothing more than a reminder of the life she had left behind, a constant shadow of her late mother. While her step-siblings reveled in their material wealth, Aisha had learned to hide her pain behind a mask of quiet compliance. The stark contrast between her family's modest life and the glamour of Mariam's world made Aisha feel like a stranger in her own skin. The weight of this isolation drove her to dreams of freedom, respect, and a life far removed from the restrictions and neglect she suffered at home. It was at the charity gala hosted by her father's company, a night where wealth and power collided in a symphony of elegance, that Aisha's life would change forever. She had reluctantly attended, her stepmother pressuring her to look her best and mingle with potential suitors, though, as usual, Aisha had been an afterthought in the sea of privileged faces. Yet, amidst the sea of elites, Farhan stood out. Tall, charming, and effortlessly attractive, Farhan exuded an air of mystery. He wasn't part of the usual social circles Aisha was accustomed to, and there was something different about him. He wasn't flashy, didn't boast about his wealth, and his eyes seemed to see more than just her beauty. They saw her. Their conversation started casually, but as the evening went on, something unspoken clicked between them. Farhan was polite, with a softness that contrasted the hardened world Aisha knew. He listened, really listened, and with each passing moment, she felt seen for the first time in a long time. But there was a catch. Despite their undeniable connection, Farhan was guarded, offering little about himself. Aisha was intrigued and, against her better judgment, felt a pull toward him that she couldn't explain. Their meeting was brief, but it left an indelible mark on her heart. Little did she know that the man she had just met was about to change her life in ways she never imagined. Farhan was not just a charming stranger, he was a key to the kind of life Aisha had only dreamed of, a life she would soon find herself secretly living. As the weeks passed, Aisha found herself drawn deeper into the world of Farhan, a man whose mystery seemed to only deepen the more she discovered about him. At first, their relationship had started as an innocent flirtation, a chance encounter at the charity gala that lingered in the corners of her mind. But with each subsequent meeting, their connection blossomed into something far more intense. Farhan, though outwardly charming and confident, was far more complicated than Aisha had first imagined. He never spoke much about his background, and whenever she inquired about his life outside of their private moments, he would deftly change the subject. Yet, there was something undeniable about him, a magnetic presence that seemed to pull Aisha in. He was warm, attentive, and always made her feel like she was the only person in the room. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to see through the walls Aisha had spent years building around her heart. Over time, Aisha learned that Farhan was a self-made billionaire, though he preferred to keep his wealth and family's name hidden from her. He was not the type to flaunt his riches. Farhan was driven not by a desire for status, but by a passion for something deeper, making a difference in the world. His humility was what made him even more attractive to Aisha, who, despite her beauty and intelligence, had always longed for something beyond the materialism and control that surrounded her life with Mariam. But the more Aisha fell in love with him, the more she felt the strain of her double life. Her stepmother, Mariam, remained oblivious to her secret. Aisha made sure to keep their meetings and phone calls discreet, masking her joy and the excitement that came with each stolen moment with Farhan. Still, a nagging feeling of guilt gnawed at her, and she found herself torn between the life she had always known, one of limitations and control, and the world Farhan offered her, a world where she could truly be herself, loved and appreciated for who she was, not just for what she could do. Farhan, for his part, understood Aisha's hesitation. He knew she was torn between loyalty to her family and the life they had created, despite its stifling atmosphere. But he was patient, never rushing her or pushing her for answers. Instead, he made his intentions clear one evening, during a private dinner in a secluded restaurant. He looked at her, his gaze soft yet determined, and took her hand gently across the table. "Aisha," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I want you to have everything you've ever dreamed of. I want to offer you a life that's beyond your wildest expectations, but I also want to make sure it's what you truly want, without any pressure." Aisha's heart fluttered in her chest as he continued. "I'm not asking for anything public, Aisha. I don't want to overwhelm you with my family's name, their expectations, or their wealth. I want us to build something together quietly, just the two of us. But I also want to marry you. I want to make you mine in every way." Farhan's words, simple yet profound, swept through Aisha like a wave of warmth. He was offering her a life she had only imagined in her dreams. Freedom, respect, love, and, most importantly, peace. Peace from her stepmother's demands, peace from her father's indifference, and peace from the constant, suffocating expectations that had defined her life. Without hesitation, Aisha nodded, her eyes misting over with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with both excitement and fear. "I want that life. I want you." The days that followed were a whirlwind of secrecy and excitement. Farhan arranged for a private wedding, one that would take place away from the prying eyes of her family and the social circles she had been part of. Aisha, still careful to keep her plans hidden from her stepmother, told Mariam she was taking a work trip to handle personal matters. The wedding was small, intimate, and breathtaking. Held in a grand but secluded estate far from the city, it felt like a dream. Aisha, in a gown that seemed to glow against the candlelit surroundings, looked like someone from a fairy tale. There was no extravagant ceremony, no large guest list, just Farhan, Aisha, and a handful of trusted witnesses. It was everything Aisha had ever wanted, and more. As the ceremony concluded, Farhan kissed her softly, and for the first time in her life, Aisha felt truly seen, no longer just the neglected stepdaughter, but the woman he loved. After the wedding, Farhan whisked Aisha away to a private mansion, an estate that seemed to belong to a world entirely different from the one she had left behind. Here, Aisha was no longer a servant in her own home. She was the lady of the house. The mansion was unlike anything Aisha had ever experienced. It was filled with stunning art, luxurious furniture, and every comfort imaginable. Private chefs, maids, and personal assistants were at her service. Everything she touched seemed to sparkle with the allure of a life she had never dared to dream of. Farhan showered her with gifts, from designer clothes to expensive jewelry, but more importantly, he showered her with love and affection. Yet, despite the beauty and abundance of her new life, Aisha was torn. She began to live a double life, visiting her family occasionally, but hiding the truth from her stepmother. When she returned home, she wore her old clothes, spoke in the same humble tones, and played the role of the dutiful daughter. But inside, she was no longer that person. She was the wife of a wealthy man, a woman who had everything she'd ever wanted, and yet the price of that luxury was secrecy. Aisha's heart ached as she realized that her stepmother, Mariam, had no idea what had truly changed in her life. Aisha, in all her new wealth and comfort, had become a stranger to her own family, living in a world that Mariam would never understand. Still, Aisha knew she couldn't risk exposing her secret. The fear of losing her family, or worse, losing Farhan, was too great. As Aisha settled into her new life, she couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep up the facade. Every visit home felt like an act, each conversation a performance. The price of love, it seemed, was more than she had expected. It didn't take long for Mariam to start noticing the subtle changes in Aisha. At first, they were small, almost imperceptible. Aisha was wearing more elegant clothes, the kind that didn't match the modest budget Mariam had grown used to. Her hair was always perfectly styled, and her skin seemed to glow with an unfamiliar radiance. But the most noticeable change was the way Aisha carried herself. She seemed more confident, her posture straighter, her voice stronger when she spoke. Gone was the shy, quiet girl who kept her head down and obeyed without question. Mariam was no fool. She had spent years studying her stepdaughter, understanding her patterns, her weaknesses, and the ways she could control her. So, when she noticed Aisha avoiding family gatherings more frequently, giving excuses like, "I'm busy with work," or "I need to handle some personal matters," she couldn't ignore it. Aisha was growing more distant, and Mariam was determined to get to the bottom of it. One evening, after Aisha had once again skipped dinner to attend to her work, Mariam decided to confront her. She waited until they were alone in the kitchen, the clinking of dishes breaking the silence between them. "Aisha," Mariam began, her voice sharp yet feigning warmth, "I've noticed you've been spending less time at home lately. Is everything all right?" Aisha, trying to keep her emotions in check, offered a polite smile. "Everything's fine, Mariam. Just a lot of work lately. You know how it is." But Mariam wasn't convinced. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Aisha's face, noting the way she shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Aisha was hiding something, and Mariam would find out what it was. "You're always working," Mariam said with a feigned laugh. "I don't think I've seen you relax in ages. Maybe it's time for you to take a break from all of this. Go out and meet some people. Have some fun. Maybe even find a real job, like normal people do." Aisha's stomach tightened. Mariam had always subtly implied that Aisha wasn't living up to expectations. Expectations Mariam herself had set, of course. But now, with this suggestion of a real job, Aisha felt the weight of the accusation. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. Mariam wanted to keep Aisha under her thumb, tied to a life of dependence and submission. "I'm doing just fine, Mariam," Aisha replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I'm happy with what I'm doing." But the words hung in the air, and Mariam wasn't convinced. Something had changed in Aisha, something that had her worried. As days passed, Mariam's suspicions only grew. Aisha seemed to have a different air about her, something that no amount of questions or subtle jabs could crack. Mariam noticed the way Aisha's phone would light up with messages during dinner, the secretive smiles she would quickly try to hide when she glanced at her screen, and the gifts, expensive bags, sparkling jewellery, and clothes that Aisha didn't seem to have the budget for. Where was all this coming from? Mariam began to press Aisha more, asking about her friends and who she was spending time with. Aisha, knowing she had to maintain the facade, offered vague responses, deflecting Mariam's questions with practiced ease. "I'm just meeting a few colleagues," Aisha would say. "We're working on a project together." But the more she deflected, the more tense their relationship became. The air between them thickened with unspoken truths, and Aisha felt a growing sense of guilt. She wasn't just keeping secrets from Mariam. She was keeping secrets from her father as well. Her father, Saeed, seemed oblivious to the tension at home. Busy with his work, he rarely paid attention to the changes in Aisha's behavior. He was content to let Mariam handle things, and in many ways, Aisha had become invisible to him. She longed for his attention, for him to notice the woman she was becoming, but it seemed that her father's indifference was just as much a part of her life as Mariam's control. This lack of emotional support only pushed Aisha further into the secrecy of her life with Farhan. She clung to the private moments of joy she shared with him, the comfort of their shared world of luxury and love. But the guilt was always there, gnawing at her conscience. Mariam, meanwhile, continued to push. Her latest attempt at controlling Aisha's life was subtle, but no less effective. She had begun to suggest that Aisha stop relying on Farhan's wealth and start thinking about your future, Aisha. You need to build your own life. Mariam's voice dripped with faux concern, but Aisha saw right through it. She didn't want Mariam to know the truth, not yet. Not until she was sure she could stand on her own 2 feet, without the chains of her stepmother's control. Aisha's world, once so clear, had become a battleground of secrets, guilt, and growing tension. The more she hid from her family, the more she was forced to become someone else, someone who didn't quite fit into either the life she had been given or the life she was building. And the longer she lived this double life, the more desperate she became to protect her new reality from the prying eyes of her stepmother. The tension had been building for weeks. Aisha could feel it in the air, her stepmother's increasing suspicion, the pointed questions, the subtle digs that seemed to target her at every opportunity. Aisha had managed to keep her secret life intact so far, but deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before her double life would unravel. The only thing she could do was continue pretending, hoping the storm would pass. But Mariam was relentless. She had grown increasingly suspicious of Aisha's behavior, and the changes in her had not gone unnoticed. Every time Aisha made an excuse about work or mentioned a meeting, Mariam's instincts told her something was off. Aisha had always been a dutiful daughter, even if she was emotionally distant. But now, there was something different about her. The confident, almost carefree woman who came home in the evenings was not the same girl who had once obeyed her stepmother's every whim. One afternoon, Mariam's curiosity got the better of her. She decided to pay Aisha a surprise visit at her supposed workplace. The cover story Aisha had told her for months, saying she was working on a special project for a company. It was a story that didn't quite make sense to Mariam, but she had never pressed her. Until now. What Mariam didn't know was that Aisha had planned to meet Farhan at their estate that day. Aisha had come to dread these secret meetings, knowing each one brought her closer to the truth being exposed. But she had no choice. Farhan was the man she loved, and their life together was everything she had ever dreamed of. Mariam arrived unannounced, determined to catch Aisha in the act. As she approached the gated entrance of the estate, she noticed the gates were open. The house was grand, far too extravagant to be a workplace for a woman like Aisha. The sprawling grounds, the beautiful marble architecture, it was like nothing she had ever seen. But Mariam, already feeling a twinge of suspicion, pressed forward. When she entered the main hall, the sight that met her eyes left her frozen in shock. There, standing in the middle of the opulent living room, was Aisha, dressed in an elegant gown, her hair perfectly styled, and Farhan. They were holding hands, laughing quietly, lost in each other's company. The way they looked at each other was undeniable. Aisha was living a life of luxury, a life that was a far cry from the girl Mariam thought she knew. Mariam's heart pounded in her chest. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing as she pieced together the fragments of the life she had only just begun to understand. Aisha had been lying to her. She had been keeping a secret so big, so life-altering, that it felt like a betrayal. Aisha's heart skipped a beat when she saw her stepmother standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. Farhan turned to look at Mariam, his expression unreadable, but Aisha felt the weight of the moment crashing down on her. The truth had finally come out. Mariam... Aisha's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she slowly let go of Farhan's hand. She had never imagined this moment would come like this, not so suddenly, not in such a raw and unforgiving way. Mariam's voice was icy, her eyes narrowing with a mix of disbelief and anger. "So this is your workplace? This is where you've been going all this time?" Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. "You've been lying to me, Aisha. All this time, you've been living a lie, married to a wealthy man, no less. And I had no idea?" Aisha felt the rush of guilt flood her chest, but she quickly steeled herself. She had kept this secret for so long, and now that the truth was out, there was no turning back. She had nothing to hide anymore. "Yes," Aisha said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm married to Farhan, and yes, this is my life now. I've been living here, in this house, because I chose to. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to control me, Mariam. I didn't want to live a life of being treated as a servant in my own home anymore." Mariam recoiled as if the words had slapped her in the face. "You ungrateful little... I've done everything for you, Aisha. I've been more than a mother to you, and this is how you repay me? By hiding the truth from me? By abandoning your family for some rich man?" Aisha's eyes narrowed, her frustration boiling over. "You never treated me like family, Mariam. You never treated me like I mattered. You've always treated me like an outsider, a burden. I was never your daughter, and now I have a chance to live the life I deserve. The life I've always dreamed of. It's not about money, Mariam. It's about being seen, being valued. Farhan gives me that. He treats me like I'm important, like I'm worthy." Mariam stepped forward, her expression hardening. "You think you can just walk away from everything I've done for you? You think you can live in this world, so high and mighty, and forget who helped raise you? You'll regret this, Aisha. You'll regret turning your back on me, on your own family." Aisha's heart raced, but she refused to back down. She had been silent for far too long. She had been the one who had always done what was expected of her, always trying to make everyone else happy at the expense of her own happiness, but no more. "I'm not turning my back on anyone, Mariam," Aisha said, her voice strong now, no longer the hesitant, quiet girl she once was. "I'm just living the life I deserve. You've had control over me for years, but I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm not asking for anything from you. This is my life now, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me into staying in a place where I'm not respected, where I'm not loved." There was a long, tense silence as the two women stared at each other. Farhan, sensing the weight of the confrontation, stepped back, giving Aisha the space she needed to stand her ground. Finally, Mariam's voice broke the silence. "You'll regret this, Aisha. You'll see. You can't escape your past forever." Aisha shook her head. "I'm not escaping anything. I'm finally living for myself." She took a deep breath and turned to Farhan, who was watching her with a quiet pride. "This is my decision, and I'm not going to let anyone, not even you, take that away from me." The confrontation marked a turning point in Aisha's life. She had finally stood up for herself, confronting the toxic relationship she had with her stepmother and taking ownership of her own happiness. Mariam, feeling betrayed and powerless, stormed out of the estate, her anger still simmering. But for Aisha, a new chapter had begun. The truth had come out, and while the road ahead would not be easy, she was no longer afraid. She was no longer bound by her stepmother's control. She had Farhan, a man who loved her, and she had her own future to create. Finally, Aisha was free. Aisha had spent so many years hiding her true self, suffocated by her stepmother's control and expectations. But now, with the truth exposed, she felt a sense of liberation unlike anything she had ever experienced. No longer would she shrink away in the shadows, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Aisha had finally found her voice, and it was a voice that would not be silenced. Living openly with Farhan was a dream come true, but more importantly, it was a symbol of her newfound independence. For the first time, Aisha realized that she didn't need to hide her happiness, her choices, or her love. She no longer felt the weight of her stepmother's constant scrutiny or the guilt of living a double life. She was free. Aisha decided to take control of her future. She began to carve out her own path, one where she could grow into the woman she had always wanted to be, someone who was not defined by her family's expectations, but by her own desires and values. With Farhan's support, Aisha flourished in ways she never thought possible. She even started thinking about ways she could give back to the community that had shaped her into the person she was. Mariam, on the other hand, found herself in a position she hadn't anticipated. Her world, once centered around control and manipulation, had crumbled in the wake of Aisha's strength and independence. Though she was still angry and resentful, something inside Mariam began to shift. She could no longer ignore the truth. Her obsession with power, wealth, and control had driven a wedge between her and Aisha, and the realization left her uneasy. She had spent so much of her life trying to build walls around her family, but in doing so, she had alienated the very people she claimed to care about. Aisha's defiance was a harsh reminder that control had never been the path to love or respect. Mariam's heart, once hardened by years of bitterness, began to soften, and she started to reconsider her approach to relationships. In time, Aisha and Farhan began to build their future together. Farhan, always the supportive partner, proposed a business venture that aligned with Aisha's passion for empowering women. The idea was simple yet profound. Aisha would use her new platform to create opportunities for women in her community, helping them break free from financial dependency and societal constraints. Together, they launched a series of workshops and mentorship programs designed to give women the tools and confidence to succeed in their own right. The project gave Aisha a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was not just living for herself, but for others who shared her dreams of independence. As Aisha's success grew, so did her relationship with her father. Despite his earlier indifference, Saeed began to see his daughter in a new light. He admired her strength, her vision, and the woman she had become. Their relationship evolved from one of emotional distance to one of mutual respect. Saeed, too, recognized his role in the strained dynamic and began to make an effort to be more present in Aisha's life, offering support where he had once been absent. Perhaps the most surprising development, however, came when Aisha decided to extend an olive branch to Mariam. After everything that had transpired, Aisha didn't harbor any bitterness. She simply wanted peace. She wanted her stepmother to understand that she could still be part of her life, just not in the way Mariam had expected. In an act of unexpected kindness, Aisha invited Mariam to join her and Farhan in their new business venture. Aisha believed that this would be a way for Mariam to reclaim her role in their family, not as a controlling figure, but as a contributor to something meaningful. Mariam, humbled by Aisha's generosity and the realization of her own flaws, agreed. The invitation to collaborate on the project marked the beginning of a new family dynamic, one that wasn't defined by manipulation or control, but by mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Mariam, slowly learning to shed her need for dominance, found a new sense of purpose in helping others, while Aisha and Farhan continued to flourish in their marriage and professional endeavors. Aisha's journey had come full circle. From a girl who once felt invisible and neglected, she had blossomed into a confident, independent woman who had taken control of her own destiny. No longer bound by her past, Aisha had created a future that was entirely her own, a future filled with love, purpose, and the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had embraced her worth, and, in doing so, had built a life that was everything she had ever dreamed of.